Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Nazneen Zera and Professor Jamal Khan, Chairman, Department of Wildlife Sciences, for giving me this opportunity to speak to this August gathering of experts from all over the country and maybe from outside. Let me tell you at the onset of my talk that I am neither an expert on GIS nor formally trained in this trade. It was a job entrusted to me by Professor Khan some time back that I must take up the responsibility of introducing a course in remote sensing. And so did I. And from here, my journey started to understanding remote sensing. Professor Khan put me on the test today once again. He is trying to test what I have done over last 10 or 15 years. And I hope with your cooperation, I would be able to pass this test. It's a great topic, talking advances in remote sensing. It's a very vast topic. And it includes a plethora of information. And it is beyond the capacity of anyone to completely talk of advances in remote sensing. I may touch upon a few things which are related to the biodiversity conservation. And I would start my talk with biodiversity conservation rather than remote sensing. What is biological diversity or biodiversity? It is not such a complex thing to understand, and I believe all the August participants or this gathering would already have an understanding what is biodiversity. However, IUCN in 1982 adopted a definition of biodiversity which Wilcox has provided or given since he was the member of the commission who was entrusted the job to provide information on biological diversity and its definition. So according to Wilcox, biological diversity is the variety of life forms at all levels of biological system. Maybe molecular, organismic, population, species, and ecosystem. Later, about a decade, the United Nations took the initiative to host an Earth Summit, and in 1992, once again, a definition of biodiversity was formulated and accepted. And that is the variability among living organisms from all sources, including inter alia, terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystem and ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes diversity within a species, between species, and ecosystems. So in a nutshell, it is the variability among the living organisms wherever they are. And the measurement of this diversity can be at 3 levels. The first one is within a species, which means the variability among the individuals of the same species, and that mostly referred as genetic diversity, because whatever variations are there among the individuals of a species, most of them are genetically governed and directed, and therefore it is within species diversity. Then between species diversity, that involves different number of species living in an area. What is the diversity of this area as far as okay, sorry about this technical snag, which is the hallmark, and most of the time it happens whenever the event are there. Anyway, I was talking about the definition of biological diversity, one which has been given by Wilcox in 1982 since he was commissioned by IUCN to provide the same. And another one, when Earth Summit took place in Rio, then a definition was given. Both the definition agrees to only one thing, that there is a variability among living organisms of all forms on this planet Earth. And the second one has been adopted as a working definition for conservation of biological diversity in its first meeting in 1992 and afterwards. So that, going through the definition and understanding that it is the variability among the living organisms, and we see all around us different organisms. There are different birds, mammals, plants, and we know that there's a large number of species are there in the world, and only 1/10 has so far been discovered. We know that also. So my question is, if that is so, then why we are worried about the biodiversity conservation or biodiversity? What makes us to think about biodiversity as an important component of science? And the answer is known to many of you. I have just described a few points here, that it has been worked out that increased biodiversity means increased ecosystem productivity. And therefore, each species in an ecosystem is important because it helps or it has a role to play in the ecosystem. Any loss of the species means you are losing a worker who is doing some particular job. And that is one reason that we are concerned about species conservation, whether it is a plant species, animal species. It supports a large number of plant species and therefore a greater variety of crops. If, as you know, that whatever we eat today as a food, the cultivated plants have the root in their wild cousins. And almost all species have come from the wild. They have been tamed or they have been bred, and therefore a large gene pool or existing gene pool would ensure more varieties, more variability, and that means it may help us in solving the future and present food problem. Certainly, biodiversity is important from point of view of freshwater resources. It is a two-way process. As the Vice Chancellor of Aligarh Muslim University has also stressed that freshwater resources are limited and their conservation is important because the other part of the biodiversity, which is not aquatic, even the terrestrial biodiversity, is dependent on freshwater resources. So it is a two-way process that freshwater resources require plants and plants require fresh water. So it is a cycle that has to operate, and therefore there is an importance of biodiversity. The biodiversity is also important, especially the plants, for formation of soil and its protection from wind and floods. So it acts as a barrier when flooding or desertification advances, and therefore these plants are important. Other species are too important, but in this particular case, the plant diversity is important, which promotes soil and protect the soil from erosion. Higher biodiversity means more nutrient storage and recycling. More individuals, more species, more interactions. Many cycles operate together. Recycling is carried out. Nutrient storage is larger, and therefore it is important. It has been learned that it aids in breaking down pollutants. It contributes to climate stability. It speeds up the recovery of natural disasters. In case a forest area, if damaged by a natural disaster, it is much easier for it to recover as compared to a barren land. And therefore, it is important. Biodiversity richness is related to the food resources as well. If you count the number of species which are edible and people are using it as a food resource, throughout the country, several thousand of them would figure in that list. And then only we will be able to understand how much biodiversity values or how much biodiversity components are being used as food resources. A very important component of everyone's life is medical resources and pharmaceutical drugs. Even in today's modern world, where the modern medicine is leading other therapies, about 90% of the drug formulations are dependent on the wild resources, largely plant and animal extracts. So our well-being is certainly linked to the biodiversity resources. And it is needless to say that beauty and pleasure is one part, and recreation and tourism is linked with this beauty which the biodiversity can offer and offers. And that our recreational needs are also fulfilled by this biodiversity. So when it is so important, then we must do something. It is our duty. If the biodiversity is so important for our well-being and existence, then certain actions are required from everyone. And one thing is that we must understand, we must document the biodiversity and its values. We must identify and quantify the threats faced by biodiversity in the world. And once we do it, then we must try to mitigate the conservation and management problems. That is what is required. And that is what has been already flagged, and there are a lot of efforts are being made at national and international levels where all these steps are being taken and continually feeding to the databases. So our problem started, and we understood that identification of a species is important, and Carl Linnaeus is who is considered to be the most modern father of taxonomy. And since the time of Linnaeus, there is a continuous effort of species identification and naming them. All over the world, innumerable number of people are involved about understanding the species, identifying them, naming them. And therefore, we have a list, a very long list of plant and animal species. Nearly about a century later, Charles Darwin and Russell Wallace, both of them have started thinking about the evolutionary process. And since then, we have been trying to understand the species distribution and the drivers or the factors affecting them. There have been a number of theories and hypotheses explaining the pattern of distribution of species, pattern of diversity. A few of them include climate stability theory, productivity hypothesis, intermediate disturbance hypothesis, and many more. And this is an ecological puzzle which these two gentlemen have started, and we are still in a process of solving this puzzle, though not completely. We have not said so far the last word about the pattern of distribution and the factors affecting the pattern of distribution of a species in the world. Some says it is the latitude which differs. Some says it is the altitude which matters. Some says it is the temperature which matters. So there are many empirical studies also which basically talks of the drivers of species diversity at different local and regional scales. But yet we have to understand the process. And therefore, there is a number of techniques, methods, and tools which have been developed over last 1 or 2 centuries. And recently, what we have developed, or the scientists have developed, a tool which is known as remote sensing, which we all know about. So that is one tool which may help understand some of the attributes of diversity or biodiversity. I would outline a few of them here in my presentation. So when we talk of the biodiversity and remote sensing, what remote sensing is presently doing and is capable of doing, as far as we can use it as a tool in understanding distribution pattern of ecological communities at a coarser scale, status and distribution of individual organisms and species assemblages at a finer scale, range and pattern of species richness in discrete habitats cannot be done directly, but an indirect measure of species richness in discrete habitats. So these are few broader areas where the remote sensing is linked with biodiversity, and to say that how we can use the remote sensing tool in biodiversity conservation or management or assessment. Now a few words about the remote sensing capabilities. It is used in land cover estimation, certainly. When we talk of the land cover, it also includes revegetation. So there are n number of sensors like MODIS, TM, ETM, ASTER, ALI, Iconos, QuickBird, ranging from 1 meter, less than 1 meter in resolution to 1,000-meter resolution. And have been used and are being used to discriminate different landforms and land surfaces at different resolution. And that is what we think is the first order analysis for a species occurrence. Where the species is there, it is in the habitat, in the landscape. So if we characterize the landscape into different similar units, identifying the land cover or the assemblage of plants or the habitat types, then certainly it resolves the first problem. Then we will have to look further. And that further problem is species composition. There are high resolution sensors which can now even identify species, what to talk of species composition or. But depends upon, because high resolution images have their own constraint vis-a-vis the area in question or area consideration. If we have to go for a global scale or even national scale or regional scale, then certainly very high resolution, though it can work, but may not be possible because of the logistic problems or logistic requirement to analyze such a large data, store it and deduce the information. So there is a trade-off between a small scale or large scale. It depends upon the objectives, what objectives we have to achieve. There are certain species of plant and animals, even aquatic mammals, that those can be identified with the help of remote sensing. So these are the direct approaches where the characteristic or a spectral characteristics of the data allowing deduction of information or analyzing it, classifying it, and getting an informed map or information in the form of the species composition, community structure, or the land use land cover type. The indirect approaches, which relates to the ecological variability or variables, is the primary productivity and chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the currency for measuring health of an ecosystem or plant system, plant ecosystem, terrestrial ecosystem, even the aquatic ecosystem as well. More chlorophyll means sometime is more healthy vegetation. More chlorophyll means more primary productivity. More chlorophyll means when more productivity, larger populations are there, more diversity. So there are indirect approaches through which we can get information about the primary productivity. Habitat structure based on the characteristics of topography. We have a number of sensors, both the spaceborne and airborne, with different spatial resolutions. And because of the altitudinal elevational differences, we can understand the distribution of species through their microclimatic conditions. And it provides information about the habitat structure of a particular species or maybe group of species. Phenology with the time series data of high resolution may help in identifying different phenological phases, and these phenological cycles can give a lot of information. This may provide information about the health of the ecosystem, the health of the vegetation. We can identify using these phenological cycles an attribute, and it helps in identification of species even in the environment. Another ecological variable is the vertical canopy structure. Mostly the airborne remote sensors are capable of recording or measuring 3D in 3D, which can provide information on the properties of the plants, even physical properties of the plant, height measurements, girth measurements, volume measurements can always be carried out. Vertical canopy structure is also important from the point of view of heterogeneity, habitat heterogeneity. And it has been found that more heterogeneous habitats have more diversity, more species diversity. And it has been shown that vertical canopy structure is important and plays an important role in deciding the diversity of avian species. So indirectly, it can provide a lot of information. There are sensors which continuously provide climate and rainfall data, or now the detection of precipitation and surface moisture at a coarse resolution. Certainly, we may not need a very fine resolution in all the cases because it may not change so frequently within few meters. Therefore, it is a coarse resolution data which helps in modeling species occurrence based on the certain factors, environmental factors like drought, maybe flood, maybe other parameters. Soil moisture is also an important parameter which decides what kind of a microclimatic conditions are there for plant species to grow. And based on one of the parameters like soil moisture, in combination with other parameters, we can still model and think about looking at the species occurrence and presence in certain areas. So these are some of the capabilities remote sensing. Sensors can provide information and we can make use of it. And this is what a lot of people and the scientists are working day and night to explore the possibility and further possibility of improving the understanding of species area relationship, species diversity, species distribution. Now, when we talk of, since we are concerned more about the vegetation distribution of plant species per se for the time being, because it is the base of a habitat and the habitat structure which plants provide and give shape, they are important from the point of view of all attendant fauna. A faunal element may be specific to grassland or the savanna, may not be there in the forest interior. And therefore, understanding the pattern of species assemblage at a landscape level is important. And therefore, I have to just discuss a few things in relation to various remote sensors providing information and what kind of information they are capable of delivering. Say Landsat TM or ETM, both of them are medium or coarse spatial resolution, clearly 30 meter. And there are n number of examples where the data set, one of the probably most used data set throughout the world, where the land cover land use mapping has been carried out and vegetation have been delineated at community level or some dominant tree species level. So it can sometimes discriminate between the most dominant species and good for discriminating homogeneous different homogeneous strains. A spot on the other side is also a full range medium spatial resolution. And it provides opportunity or capability of mapping vegetation at community level or species level, since the resolution is 20 meter to 2.5 meter. It has better interpretability because of the resolution, the spatial resolution. I'm not talking about the spectral resolution. There are certain problems with the spectral resolution of a spot, maybe. But this is not a point of discussion here. I'm just talking about that the spot data is good for mapping vegetation at community level, and better interpretation can be obtained by using this. MODIS is again a low spatial resolution, and it is suitable for mapping at a larger scale, larger area, not a scale, but larger area at a national, continental, or global scale, because it provides you, as I told you, there is a trade-off between good high resolution data and low spatial resolution data. You can cover larger area if you have the low spatial resolution, and smaller area is good for higher resolution. Otherwise, it will be logistically not suitable to work out a quick bird data at a global level, to understand vegetation cover at global level. Then AVHRR, its resolution is 1 kilometer. Again, this is suitable for vegetation mapping at national, continental, or global scale. QuickBird, Iconos, and these are again sensors which are of high resolution, and therefore local and regional scale vegetation mapping and species level identification, at least the community level identification is possible, and therefore it is good for local, regional level, or at the local or regional scales when vegetation mapping has to be performed. Then further advancement has made it possible where hyperspectral images have come, and different sensors are there which are providing more than 200 bands in the same bandwidth which other sensors are providing. And since that this spectral resolution is so high, therefore it is possible to go down to the species level identification, and it is one of the advancement in present times where we are able to scan the area for even species composition and community composition or community structure. That is possible. There are a lot of advancement in image classification systems also. Traditionally, there are two methods: unsupervised classification and supervised classification. This unsupervised classification largely run on k-mean and isodata clustering algorithms. There are other algorithms as well, but the most used are these ones. They're easy to perform. There's no problem because no prior knowledge is required, as you all aware. Because this is the basic of the remote sensing. I should not be wasting my time in telling this. But I'm just trying to say that the traditional method of classification is providing opportunity to classify images and vegetation and identify species, but all these algorithms which have so far been developed not necessarily provide accurate results in all the situations. So these are basic methods, and there are, I would say, probably hundreds and thousands of techniques which have been employed using these very basic algorithms to obtain better results. So this is a continuous process whereby these traditional methods are used in conjunction with newer technologies, or techniques rather, not technology, but techniques to identify and improve the vegetation classification. I give you an example. Of a study of Shrestha, where land use classification in mountainous area of Nepal, he has processed the data and identified the problem and removed those. In mountainous region, a strong photographic variation due to elevation differences, illumination variations, effect of topographic shadows and parcel size poses a problem of correct identification of species and communities. Elevational differences between ridges and valley bottom causes climatic conditions or climatic variations, and these microclimatic variations are often associated with the type of species growing there, and therefore it is not at all feasible for the mountainous region to treat them, all these places equally, the valley bottom or the slopes and the upper portion or the top of a mountain, because there are elevational differences, there are differences in illumination, the differences because of shadows. One aspect is sunlit, the other is dark, and therefore the spectral classification in such situation alone is not sufficient, because these both of the traditional methods, supervised and unsupervised classification, depends upon the spectral classification or spectral characteristics of the pixels. Though the unsupervised classification do take into consideration the shape and size of the training set, but largely depend on spectral properties. So they have come to a solution, and first they have normalized individual spectral band and removed the variation in solar illumination angle or solar illumination. Then they obtained the height data and based on this height data or altitudinal variation, in combination with the expert knowledge, improved the spectral classification the same. because they knew on the mountain top, sal forest will not be there. They knew quercus will not be there at the valley bottom. So it was a successful attempt by modifying the existing algorithms, but giving more input into it, and with a combination of additional data, they have come out with a method which has improved the classification and understanding of species distribution. So I'm just giving an example here to emphasize that there are continuous efforts to understand the existing algorithms and modify the techniques of identification for obtaining better results. Another example is from a study carried out by Stuart in a savanna situation, where this savanna could very easily be demarcated sharply and separated with other land use land cover patterns using the standard techniques, the maximum likelihood classifier. That algorithms has helped in identifying savanna boundaries, but within the savanna, the subtypes, it was difficult to discriminate between those subtypes within the savanna by the same algorithms. And therefore, they also have obtained GPS location of known areas, combined this information from the ground with that of the continuous classification of Landsat data, and a little modification, they could come out with 7 or 8 classes within the savanna. So that is where the savanna has, the classification has improved. But all these techniques are not just 1 or 2, but they are thousands in number probably. And it is very difficult and beyond the scope of this talk to include all. What I want to emphasize that there is a lot progress even in species identification and species distribution or distributional pattern of vegetation communities and understanding its ecology. And there are a number of techniques used by different people to improve the interpretation and improve classification. But these all techniques used by different people, some of them may be of global utility, but most of them are in local situations where the researchers have tried to solve the local problems, as I have just outlined these 2 examples. May not necessarily be true for every kind of vegetation characterization or vegetation communities characterization in all the situations. May not work in deserts, may not work in other places. So one has to be careful when choosing a particular technique to carry out this kind of a work. Now, this is a time to, I cannot certainly appreciate, because lot other people have to appreciate the efforts IIRS has made in characterization of biodiversity at landscape level. A national assessment has been carried out, and it was orchestrated by none other than my long time, I certainly find him a guru, P.S. Roy and S.P.S. Kushwaha, Dr. Porwal, and 13, 14 more people who were involved in. So it is one of the greatest product which IIRS has produced as far as biodiversity is concerned. It is not that they have not produced other things. They have done a remarkable research in every sphere, in different divisions. But I know of this division because I was associated with it. And let me mention that my journey of remote sensing began with my friendship of Professor A.K. Tiwari or Dr. A.K. Tiwari, who was then in IIRS, and in 1986 he was the person who had mapped vegetation of Rajaji National Park. I cannot claim to be the first study, but one of the few first studies. Those have been carried out at that time, and Dr. Anil was one of them. I must pay a great tribute to his knowledge, and I fondly remember that he was my friend. Then later on, Professor S.P.S. Kushwaha guided me and has introduced me to the field of remote sensing. I owe a lot, sir, to him. The contribution of Dr. P.S. Roy is unmatched at national level, at the level of IIRS, at the level, at my personal level as well. And certainly the contribution, which is in the form of a voluminous information about the biodiversity characterization, is acknowledged world over. And it is one of the guide which can be used as a further guideline for working at regional and local level, where several thousand transects all over the country were established, monitored, data was collected, and then placed into a voluminous report. And this is one of the product of IIRS, which is being used by everyone as far as decisions at higher level is concerned or are concerned. This is one study just to show that for a stand species, until now we were talking about the classification of vegetation at community level, but here with the advancement of high resolution or availability of high resolution data, it is possible to map even the species. And this is one example where the forest stand has been mapped for its species distribution. So now this is a reality which we have sometimes thought that it may be a puzzle, but it is now not a puzzle. At least the puzzle is there, ecological puzzle is there, but this puzzle has solved that we can map the species distribution. Invasive species is a challenge. Because all over the world, it is a problem. They have colonized in different areas where they were earlier not present. They are invading newer areas, ecological areas, and reducing the ecological space available for other species to occupy and flourish. And it has been found that these invasive species are also responsible for exterminating some of the native species or replacing native species. So from the management point of view or from the biodiversity conservation point of view, it is important that we must understand the dynamics of invasive plant species. At least the distribution is the first one. How and at what places they are distributed. And therefore, I am just giving an example from a study with Joshi et al. And his co-workers have conducted in Nepal, where they have found out a way to map and model invasive plant species. The first level is where the invasive plant is representing the top canopy. So a simple spectral classification is sufficient to understand the distribution of those species which are at the top of the canopy. Then comes which are mixed. They are not top canopy, but they are understory or mixed situation. In this mixed situation, it is still possible to have an understanding of mixed spectral signatures or radiance and identify the species and areas. May not directly, but semi-directly. The third level is where species are not top canopy, not intermixed, but part of an understory of top canopy. Here, indirect information can be deduced through indirect method of modeling the species distribution of invasive plants. This is what the traditionally been carried out. And the fourth problem is one where gaps are not there and species are totally at the ground level and the understory and overstory trees are independent of invasive species. Then how to have this kind of a problem? though it has also been solved by several people or scientists, whereby they have combined the spectral properties of pure stain, then semi-pure stain, and but to a less reliable scale. However, with the advancement of the active remote sensors and some of the passive ones as well, with high resolution, it is now possible to go at the ground level and even understand the species composition and the gaps in between, and then find out the species and identify the species. And these invasive plant species can be modeled, can be identified, can be mapped with much ease as compared to the previous situation. Another I would say, the level at which we understand the biodiversity, the ground biomass, above ground biomass. Though the earlier speaker has emphasized the role of below ground biomass as well, the Faculty of Life Sciences, but certainly we are concerned with, we are seeing, or we are able to see, not the one which is hidden from us or from our sensors. So here, ground biomass or above ground biomass, the studies on biomass are important from several points of view. It is just not the statistics, forest statistics about biomass, but it provides information how best the ecosystem is doing, what kind of services it is providing, whether the health of the ecosystem is okay or not. And therefore, above ground biomass is important to measure, and there are several methods defined, or there are sensors from spaceborne to airborne which can provide information, and these information can be detected or deduced and interpreted in terms of biomass. Largely, the traditional method, not of remote sensing, but the traditional method is, which is invasive method, where removal of species or cutting down in weighing was in practice. Later, equations were developed based on the volume derived from the height and girth or the basal area of the plant, and then converted into dry biomass or biomass by detecting the moisture contents, which is normally said is about 20 to 25%. And these were the methods, forestry methods, which were time consuming and labor intensive. But now with these, advancement in the remote sensing, it is now possible to carry out all these operations in conjunction with the data sets or with the field data. So field data is important in the sense that you have to collect information about the height, about the girth, about the presence of a species. Then this data is used as a training set and then interpolated, and classification can be carried out, which provides you the results of above ground biomass estimation. However, there are two main concerns. One is that though it is true for every type of classification that the images or the data used must be perfectly geo-rectified and it should perfectly match with the ground situation. But here, since you are taking the GPS locations as the location of those trees, which then you are identifying the pixels on the image data and then trying to estimate the biomass. Therefore, it is important to have a perfect knowledge of the area and perfect georeferencing of the data and geometric corrections. Now, this problem, I believe, will be solved soon, where the ground data may not have been used at all because of the reasons that now we have sensors which can even give me or give the information about the number of species, number of plants, density of the plants, even crown diameter, bole height, bole diameter, and all those parameters which I require or which one requires for understanding the ground biomass, above ground biomass. Those equations can now be framed, and there are efforts where this has been done, but it will be more in use after some time, probably, when the technique will be perfect. Until then, we assume that there is a lot of scope of research where the high resolution data can be converted into measuring, and that is there already there, but at a larger scale it can measure and then transfer this knowledge in calculating the above ground biomass. It is just a visual from a study carried out in China, because that was easily available to me, where with the use of remote sensing and forest inventory data, this biomass density calculation has been carried out in different areas. And that gives the dry biomass mg per hectare. So that is possible, and people have been using the ancillary data or the forest inventory data with that in conjunction with the multi-source remote sensing data, and then predicting or calculating the above ground biomass. Another important aspect of ecology and biodiversity is habitat suitability. And this habitat suitability is dependent upon the requirement of animal. A large number of studies have been carried out, but perhaps Dr. P.S. Roy and Dr. Kushwaha are among the few first one to start geospatial modeling or geospatial habitat modeling of animals. I'm aware of their work, and certainly I was also associated, and we have come out with 2 papers on habitat suitability way back in 2000 and 2002. So these were the first few efforts, though indices were generated earlier about the habitat suitability. Indices were generated in US, but modeling of habitat suitability was probably carried out in India by these 2 gentlemen, among few others. And that is based on the requirement. Earlier it was the assumed requirement that the animal avoids presence of human being, animal likes shade, animal prefer forest, animal avoid dry forest, and so on and so forth. So depending upon the kind of an animal and its habitat and interaction, the weightages were given to the equation, and the first iteration of habitat suitability was like trying to figure out where the animal could be found because of the suitability or what kind of a habitat is suitable. But all these calculation of habitat suitability were based on the personal experiences, because at that time the ecological data on animals were also lacking. Now there is a lot of information about the animal species and their ecology. So their ecological data helps in designing habitat suitability. But in the meantime, a lot more algorithms have been developed to model the habitat suitability, and it has gone beyond traditional one, where we would like to say 0 non-suitable, 1 is suitable, more suitable, highly suitable, and so on. Now this informed decision is coming from the hard ecological data, which has been statistically rigorously analyzed, and then afterwards extracting those information or variables which are related to the habitat, and these habitat variables are put into a model, a statistical model, and based on that statistical model deciding which area is suitable and which area is not suitable. So a lot of efforts and technical efforts have moved into it in betterment of ecological modeling or habitat suitability. So that is one area which is still requires a lot of refinement, and a continuous efforts are being made to model habitat not only based on the habitat variable but others also. And in one of the studies which Professor Kushwaha and myself has carried out in Corbett Tiger Reserve, where the sub-models of species or sub-models of prey species have been input into the main model of suitability for tiger, because tiger dependent upon not only the habitat characteristics, but what it eats, what it feeds on. So these are, as the science is advancing, as our understanding is moving ahead, we are also trying to relate it to the real situation. Another important aspect or capability of remote sensing is providing change detection. Change detection is a common use platform, I would say. It can be used for any kind of change detection. It can be used change detection in water bodies. It can be used change detection in animal habitat. It can be used change detection in case of climatic change. Any kind of change which is on the surface of Earth can be detected probably by these new elements and detectors or the sensors. However, what is important from our point of view is the change detection is one example of change detection. Here I am giving, it has been borrowed the map, and I'm showing a map which shows the spatio-temporal variation in breeding habitat of bird species. So it is the red area specifies that the original habitat has been converted into other habitat, and green area is the unchanged habitat or unchanged area, which means this is the breeding habitat of that particular bird species, while the red area, though it is purely based on the change detection, how the changes have occurred in the habitat of or the landscape level, and how these changes are related to a particular species well-being. That is one of the case I would like to present here. Another most important problem, as has been pointed out by my Vice Chancellor as well, that due to change in climatic variability, the forest fire incidences have increased over a period of last few decades. Their extent is increasing. So there is a need to understand whether we can monitor the change or not. Yes, we can monitor the change. And change detection is one way. There are sensors which are providing daily coverage of fire and smoke globally up to twice a day. There are indices which have been developed, burn area index, normalized burn ratio, and several others. What is important is not once the fire has took place, then it has destroyed. We have to monitor the changes which may cause fire to ignite. And there are several studies which have been carried out which effectively deals with the situation or the condition where they are able to predict fire and fire coverage. So monitoring of previous fire incidences is one through the change detection. Monitoring the effect of fire before and after the fire has ignited in place is altogether different story. But predicting the fire incidents and fire hazard regions is more important from the conservation and management point of view of biodiversity values. And that remote sensing and GIS is capable of predicting that. And there are several studies in India as well, where the fire hazard models have been developed, which indicates the regions within a small region, even the smaller national park level studies have been conducted and carried out, which specifies that how much area are under higher fire risk zone. That is the importance. So change detection, fire is an incidence where we can use change detection to understand the effect of fire. Another use of change detection is forest damage by disease and insect infestation. These are two photographs showing the infestation of a disease affecting the species, and then the species totally affected in the sense that trees are no more surviving. They are dead trees, still up there, but they are physiologically dead. Now the same thing is here as in relation to the fire. Fire predictive modeling is a little tricky, but forest or disease monitoring is a little easier, in the sense that it can be detected at an early stage. Early warning, the vegetation gives signals for early warning of detection. And if we do that, that can be carried out. The spectral, spatial, and temporal characteristics of the data is capable of providing information on chlorophyll levels and leaf water contents. And these chlorophyll levels and leaf water contents, or even LAI, is an indicator of onset of a disease. Because if the onset of a disease, not all individuals are equally affected and manifestation is not quick. It is a process which is slow. And in this slow process, we can identify, and early warning system can be, early warning monitoring can be done, and the corrective measures can be taken. Though once the damage is done, it is easy to monitor and it is easy to identify and detect, because the chain detection process is capable of providing such information. So that is all from my side. Thank you very much for bearing with me for so long. And the floor is open for discussion and questions.